Few of us in this room may say this land belonged to our ancestors, as many of them migrated here from distant places. Some may wonder, how do we call this land our own? If our people have been here for fewer than 200 years, while the native population has been here for more than 12,000. Well, the answer lies in our collective myth-making, namely in our ancestors' journeys here. We tell stories about their time in steerage, about their desire to find a better life for their children. This nostalgia for our ancestors' journey stirs our pride in countless ways. In recent years, as many as 12 million Americans have taken DNA genealogy tests, myself included. As I recently discovered, I am 74% Ashkenazi Jewish, 14% Polish, and 12% Italian. We, the American people, are fascinated by our history of migration, given our need to justify our transplantation here. Today, many still arrive at our shores and borders. Central Americans, for instance, flee violence and seek refuge here. Yet even the most compassionate Americans among us would rarely view these modern migrants with the same nostalgia as turn-of-the-century immigrant stories that surround Ellis Island and the Statue of Liberty. Migration is largely a part of the fabric of America, yet in recent years, new migrants have been maligned. Our ancestors are, by contrast, viewed with pride, whereas modern migrants are viewed as invasive and dangerous to the cultural, social, and political fabric of America. By applying this double standard and wholly ignoring the underlying causes of mass migration, we have in effect exacerbated the problem by being ignorant to what has caused it. Given the history of migration to these shores, there should be no distinction between those who came years ago and those who came yesterday. Yet we perpetually squabble about the compassionate mission of migrants over protecting American jobs, all while seeking to curb migration. In doing so, we forget 2 centuries of U.S. policy towards Latin America that has in large part created this very migration. While the United States is not responsible for the potato famine in Ireland, pogroms in Russia, or the Holocaust, all of which drove people to these shores, we are responsible for an intervention in El Salvador that led to a 36-year-long civil war. We are responsible for an intervention in Guatemala that led to a 12-year-long civil war. We are responsible for funding and arming the Contras in Nicaragua, as well as for interventions here, 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 and even here. These interventions led to the perpetuation of human rights abuses that included the killing of women and children. These interventions allowed violence to thrive and forced hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children north in search of safer land. U.S. intervention in Latin America, once motivated by, in the words of President Reagan, to, quote, draw a line in the sand to prevent the spread of communism, have failed disastrously. U.S. intervention in Latin America over a 40-year period has led to chronic instability, where extragovernmental groups have tortured, assaulted, killed multitudes of civilians. U.S. intervention in Guatemala, for example, and the subsequent civil war and its aftermath, resulted in the deaths of over 200,000 people. That means that 1 out of every 50 Guatemalans was killed as a result. Similarly, in Nicaragua, after the United States sent arms and funds to the Contras there, a decade of violence ensued. Salvadoran troops, moreover, armed and funded by the United States, massacred whole villages in the name of hunting socialist rebels. It's important to underscore that these nations prior to U.S. intervention were on the path to stability, with successful elections being held in Guatemala immediately prior to U.S. intervention there. Yet 200,000 dead and more than twice that number displaced, and we still gripe about there not being enough space in America for these immigrants. Likewise, in Chile in 1973, tanks would roll down the streets and hundreds and thousands of young men would be rounded up in a previously peaceful country because President Nixon sought to, quote, give the hook to Allende, the then president of Chile, who would be later ousted in a coup with CIA backing. Unlike the potato famine in Ireland, the United States is in large part responsible for creating the conditions that led to mass migration in Latin America, but we have largely failed to take responsibility for the millions affected. It is difficult to impress the difficulties of migrating, whether it's walking thousands of miles over unfamiliar terrain, struggling to survive along the way, or if it is in steerage in the hold of a boat for weeks on end. Yet for many Americans, modern migrants are nothing more than anonymous people walking en masse in photographs and not the portrait of a great-grandparent on the mantel. However, I would meet a man, let's call him Damien, who would encapsulate both. Damien's father, a Jew, and his new bride fled Poland in May of 1939, months before the German invasion. They relocated to Chile, saving themselves from extermination. Damien's father built a successful life there, living peacefully there for many years. His story of migration is one that is not unlike many of our own. However, Damien himself would experience the flip side of the migration coin. After the 1973 coup there, he would be forced to remain in the United States, for his homeland was beset by chaos. Damien described to me how a friend of his was killed in the presidential palace during the coup, and how his relatives wrote to him detailing the political violence against members of the former government and the shortages that made living in Chile untenable. What Damien described to me, he needed no DNA kit to tell me why his father had fled Poland, and nor did he need CNN to regale him with stories of the suffering of migrants, for he lived both. While few Americans would feel as though Damien's father was invasive, some may feel that his son was. It is important to emphasize the importance of migration in America. In saying this, I do mean to disparage the United States. However, as a patriotic American, I do intend to point out America's faults so we may rectify her wrongs and strive for the values that lie at the moral center of this nation. The beauty of America lies in her ability to embrace her principles and pursue justice. I believe that we can do that, and I believe that we must do that. We, the American people, need to look beyond our rhetoric and preconceived notions and recognize a failed social attitude towards migrants and a failed foreign policy that has forced them here. For too long, a failed foreign policy has flourished, enabling us to muffle the cries of migrants with our bombastic political rhetoric. In order to bring about any meaningful change, we must end our passivity towards migrants and towards foreign policy alike. Thank you.